lately. It feels like you're present, but not fully inside your life. You wake up, you move through the day, you answer texts, you nod in conversations, but something feels slightly removed. Like there's a thin layer of glass between you and everything. You're here, but you're not fully in it. And what makes it harder is this: nothing is technically wrong. Your life hasn't collapsed. There's no big crisis, no dramatic ending, yet something feels distant. I remember the first time I noticed it in myself. I was sitting in my car after work, engine off, just staring at the steering wheel. And I had this strange thought: if my whole life changed tomorrow, would I even react? That scared me, because I wasn't sad. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was just detached, and I didn't know what that meant. But what I eventually understood changed the way I see this phase completely. And it starts with something most people misunderstand. When detachment shows up, the mind panics. Am I depressed? Am I becoming cold? Did I lose passion? But look closer. You're still functioning. You still care about people. You still feel things. They're just softer, less sharp, less urgent, less gripping. That's not numbness. Numbness feels heavy. This feels light, almost airy, like the volume of life got turned down from a 9 to a 4. I went through months of this. Music didn't hit the same. Achievements didn't spike dopamine the way they used to. Even arguments didn't trigger me the way they once did. At first, I thought I was losing my edge. But what if you're not losing your edge? What if you're losing your attachment to stimulation? There's a difference. One is collapse, the other is evolution. And most people can't tell the two apart because we were trained to feel alive through intensity, through wanting, through chasing, through proving. So when intensity fades, we assume something is wrong. But what if intensity fading is the first sign of something stabilizing? Because here's what nobody tells you about manifestation and spiritual growth. Before your reality expands, your nervous system recalibrates. And that recalibration feels strange. Almost like you've stepped out of your old emotional operating system, but you haven't installed the new one yet. That in-between space? That's where detachment lives, and it's not random. Most spiritual content talks about alignment, vibration, letting go, trusting the universe. But very few people talk about what that actually feels like in the body. For most of your life, your nervous system stayed activated. You wanted something, you feared losing something, you tried to become something. That constant tension created energy. It made you feel driven, focused, alive. Even stress can feel like purpose. But when you start doing inner work, something subtle happens. The chasing slows down. The urgency softens. You don't feel the same rush when someone praises you. You don't spiral the same way when someone ignores you. And without that constant stimulation, everything feels quieter. When this happened to me, I honestly thought I was becoming lazy. I wasn't obsessing over outcomes. I wasn't replaying conversations in my head. I wasn't pushing as hard. There was just space. But I didn't know how to exist in space because my system had only known tension. If your body learned to feel alive through pressure, calm will feel unfamiliar. And unfamiliar often gets labeled as detachment. But calm isn't emptiness, it's neutrality. And neutrality feels boring at first, which is why so many people try to recreate drama during this phase. They text the ex, they pick unnecessary fights, they overwork again, not because they want chaos, but because chaos feels familiar. And what's happening underneath all of this is even deeper. Detachment isn't just emotional, it's existential. Because if you're not driven by the same fears, not excited by the same goals, not triggered by the same people, then who are you? That question doesn't get answered overnight. It just hangs there, quiet. I remember realizing I didn't want the same things anymore, not because I failed, but because the hunger behind them dissolved, and that was terrifying. If I'm not chasing validation, if I'm not proving something, if I'm not trying to outgrow my past, then what's moving me? For a while, nothing was, and that felt like floating without gravity. Here's the part most people don't admit. When identity begins to loosen, life feels less personal. You're still there, but you're less attached to the storyline, less invested in the character. That distance can feel cold, but it's actually space forming around the old self. And space always feels empty before it feels expansive. You're not becoming indifferent, you're becoming less entangled. The problem is, we were taught that intensity equals aliveness. So when intensity drops, we assume meaning dropped with it. But meaning isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's waiting for you to stop gripping long enough to notice it. And this is usually the moment people try to fix themselves. They try to feel more, want more, force clarity. But this phase isn't asking you to add anything. It's asking you to allow something to fall away. And what's falling away might surprise you. At some point, you notice it. The goals that once fueled you don't hit the same. The dream relationship, the money milestone, the image you were building. You can still see them, but you don't feel pulled by them. And that can feel scary, because desire used to organize your life. Desire gave you direction. Desire gave you structure. Desire gave you momentum. When that momentum slows, it feels like you're drifting. I went through a season where I achieved something I had wanted for years, and the reaction inside me was calm. Not explosive joy, not pride, just quiet. At first I thought something was wrong with me. Shouldn't this matter more? But here's what I slowly realized. Sometimes it's not that you don't want anything, it's that you no longer want things from lack. When desire is fueled by, I need this to feel enough, it's intense. When desire shifts to, this would be beautiful, but I'm already okay, it's softer, and softer feels unfamiliar. Manifestation shifts here too. When you stop chasing from fear, reality pauses, not because you're blocked, but because your system is recalibrating what it actually resonates with. Old desires dissolve so aligned ones can form, but there's a gap between dissolution and clarity. That gap feels like detachment. And during that gap, people often feel alone. You might notice conversations feel different. Not bad, not dramatic, just flatter. You listen, you respond, but you're not as hooked. You're less reactive, less pulled into gossip, less triggered by opinions. And without reactivity, connection can feel muted, because most bonding in the world happens through shared tension. Complaining together, worrying together, chasing together. When you stop operating from tension, you don't sync the same way. I remember sitting with close friends and realizing I wasn't emotionally looping with them anymore. I cared about them deeply, but I wasn't feeding the same narratives, and that felt isolating. Not because they changed, because I did. When you shift internally, your engagement style shifts too. You stop performing, you stop proving, you stop subtly trying to control how you're perceived. That creates space, and space can feel like distance before it feels like clarity. This is the lonely part people don't post about, the in-between, where you're not who you were, but you haven't magnetized your new frequency of connection yet. So it feels quiet, and the mind starts asking, am I losing everyone? But you're not losing people. You're losing patterns. And that distinction matters, because what's forming next isn't based on tension, it's based on resonance. And resonance moves slower. Under all of this, there's usually a quiet fear. If I don't feel strongly, if I'm not urgent, if I'm not striving, am I becoming passive? We've been conditioned to equate drive with worth, so when drive softens, identity shakes. I had a moment where I questioned my ambition. I used to wake up with this restless push, goals lined up in my mind before my feet hit the floor. Then one day, that push wasn't there. There was peace instead. And oddly, peace felt threatening, because who am I without the pressure? But here's the truth. Most spiritual growth doesn't glamorize. Your system cannot live in survival mode forever. At some point, it chooses safety. And safety feels like stillness before it feels like power. When your nervous system stops scanning for threat, it stops generating adrenaline. And without adrenaline, life feels slower. Not empty, slower. That slowing can feel like detachment, but what's really happening is this. You're learning to exist without being braced, without being on guard, without gripping outcomes. That's not apathy, that's regulation. And regulation feels boring to a system addicted to intensity, which is why many people sabotage this phase. They create new stress, new urgency, new drama, just to feel something sharp again. But if you stay with the quiet, something unexpected begins to happen. At first, the detachment feels like distance, but if you stop fighting it, it slowly turns into space, and space is different. Distance feels cold, space feels open. When I stopped trying to fix myself, stopped forcing passion, stopped trying to manufacture intensity, I noticed something subtle. Small things started to feel clear again. Not dramatic, not explosive, just clean. A walk felt grounding. A conversation felt simple. A decision felt less heavy. Meaning didn't come back as urgency. It came back as resonance. Instead of "I need this to happen," it felt like "this feels right." That shift is quiet. And that's why most people miss it. Because we're trained to look for big emotional highs as proof of alignment. But true alignment often feels neutral before it feels powerful. It's steady. And steadiness doesn't spike dopamine. It builds trust. In manifestation, this is where things start moving behind the scenes. Not because you're visualizing harder, but because you're no longer vibrating from fear. When you stop gripping, reality reorganizes. But that reorganization is subtle at first. And there's one more piece people overlook in this phase. You can't think your way out of this. You can't journal your way out of it in a week. You can't raise your vibration overnight. Because this isn't just mental, it's physiological. Your nervous system is learning how to feel safe without stimulation. For years, safety meant control. Control meant planning. Planning meant tension. Now your body is learning a new definition, safety without gripping. That rewiring takes time. I tried to rush it. I tried to force excitement back into my life, signed up for new projects, set bigger goals, pushed myself socially, and every time my body felt tired, not lazy, tired of performing urgency. That's when it clicked. This phase wasn't asking me to accelerate. It was asking me to recalibrate. Recalibration feels like nothing is happening, but under the surface, everything is reorganizing. Old emotional hooks are dissolving. Old fears are losing charge. Your identity is untangling from survival, and untangling is quiet work. You don't see it, you don't feel fireworks, you just feel suspended. But suspension is not stagnation, it's integration. And if you allow integration to complete, what comes next feels completely different. Engagement comes back. But not the old kind, not urgency, not pressure, not proving. It returns as clarity. You start noticing what actually matters to you, not what impressed people, not what filled a void, not what distracted you from discomfort, what resonates. For me, creativity came back first, not because I forced it, but because there was space for it. I wasn't creating to be validated. I wasn't speaking to be approved. I was expressing because it felt natural again. That's the difference. When detachment completes its cycle, action doesn't feel like escape. It feels like alignment, and alignment is quiet confidence. You move slower, but cleaner. You choose fewer things, but more intentionally. Relationships shift too. You connect with people who don't require performance. Conversations feel deeper, even if they're simpler. And here's the strange part. You realize you were never disconnected from life. You were disconnected from compulsion. Compulsion feels like purpose when it's all you know, but when it falls away, purpose returns without pressure. And that changes everything. But there's one final reframe that makes this whole phase make sense. You're not detaching from life. You're detaching from survival mode. Read that again. For most of your existence, your system operated on, what do I need to fix? What do I need to secure? What do I need to prove? That constant scanning created identity. When the scanning stops, identity feels thin, but thin doesn't mean empty. It means spacious. This is the threshold between reacting to life and responding to it, between chasing outcomes and allowing aligned action. The reason it feels strange is because survival is loud, presence is quiet, and if you've lived in loud for years, quiet can feel like disappearance. But you're not disappearing, you're stabilizing. When I finally stopped labeling my detachment as a problem, something softened. I didn't need to be on all the time. I didn't need to be emotionally intense to be real. I could just exist, and existence without pressure felt foreign.